The sun hung low over the endless stretch of a two-lane road slicing through rural Virginia, its rays glinting off the chipped paint of an old pickup truck parked on the shoulder. Dust swirled in the warm September breeze, carrying the scent of dry grass and pine sap. Mara Kessler, her dark hair tied back in a loose braid, leaned over the open hood, her hands blackened with grease. Her denim shirt was rolled up to her elbows, revealing a faint scar snaking across her forearm. She squinted against the glare, her hazel eyes sharp with focus, muttering to the engine as if it could answer. "Come on, you old beast, don't quit on me now." On the passenger seat, propped against a cracked thermos, sat a faded Polaroid. Two women in desert camo, their faces streaked with dirt, grinned at the camera. One was Mara, younger, her jaw set with defiance. The other was Lila Brent, her best friend, her eyes bright with a fire that never dimmed, even in memory. Mara's fingers brushed the photo as she climbed back into the cab. "Told you we'd see the whole damn country, Lila," she said softly, her voice catching on the edge of a smile. The truck's engine had sputtered to a stop just off a quiet service road near the edge of Camp Pendleton, a Marine base tucked behind a chain-link fence. The distant thump of boots marching in formation echoed through the trees, mingling with the hum of cicadas. Mara slid beneath the truck, her boots scraping against gravel as she wrestled with a stubborn fuel line. Her tank top clung to her sweat-soaked skin, and under the strap, a tattoo peeked out. A raven clutching a dagger, framed by a weathered crescent moon. The mark of Shadow Squad, a unit whispered about in classified briefings, its missions locked away in files few would ever see. She didn't hear the crunch of tires until a dusty Jeep rolled to a stop nearby. 3 Marines stepped out, their uniforms crisp despite the heat. The leader, a wiry corporal with a buzz cut, clutched a tablet. "Ma'am, this is a restricted zone," he said, his tone clipped. "You need to move this vehicle." Mara kept working, her wrench clicking rhythmically. "Not parked," she called from under the truck. "Broke down. Give me 10 minutes. "Doesn't work that way," another Marine said, his voice sharper. "Call a tow. Now." She slid out, wiping her hands on her jeans, her expression calm but unyielding. "I'm fixing it. Won't be here long." The corporal frowned, stepping closer. "This is federal property. You're too close to the base. Move it, or we'll move it for you." Mara's eyes flicked to the fence, then back to the Marines. "I'm not inside your perimeter," she said evenly. "Just let me finish." The third Marine, younger, with a nervous edge, reached for his radio. "I can call security if we need to." Mara's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, another vehicle approached, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. It stopped abruptly, kicking up gravel. The Marines snapped to attention as a tall woman emerged, her uniform adorned with the silver eagles of a colonel. Colonel Nora Vance scanned the scene, her gray-streaked hair pulled back tightly, her gaze piercing. She took in the truck, the Marines, and then Mara. Her eyes locked on the tattoo, and her breath hitched. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The colonel's posture stiffened, and then slowly, she raised her hand in a crisp salute. The Marines exchanged confused glances, their tablets and radios forgotten. Mara stood still, her own surprise flickering before she nodded back, a silent acknowledgement. "Colonel," the corporal stammered, "we're handling a perimeter issue." "Stand down," Colonel Vance said, her voice low but firm. She stepped closer to Mara, her eyes never leaving the tattoo. "Shadow Squad," she said quietly. "You were at Al Hadith, weren't you?" Mara's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "A long time ago." The colonel's gaze softened. "I was there too. You pulled my unit out of that ambush. Saved 6 of us when the convoy went down." Mara looked away, her fingers brushing the wrench in her pocket. "Just did what needed doing." The colonel turned to the Marines. "This woman is not to be disturbed. Get a mechanic out here, now." The corporal blinked, then nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Mara exhaled, glancing at the Polaroid through the truck's open window. Lila's grin seemed to wink at her. "Guess we picked a hell of a spot to break down," she murmured. The heat pressed down, but something lighter stirred in the air, a sense of recognition, of a door cracking open to a past Mara thought she'd left behind. The truck's engine block was still warm, and she leaned against it, watching the Marines scramble to obey. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a drifter, not as a woman fixing a truck, but as something more. Something she'd buried with Lila all those years ago. The Virginia sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. Mara Kessler leaned against the side of her pickup, the metal warm under her palm, the faint hum of the base's activity drifting through the pines. The raven and dagger tattoo on her shoulder caught the fading light, its edges softened by time but still sharp with meaning. She wiped a streak of grease from her cheek, her eyes fixed on the open hood where a base mechanic now worked, his hands moving with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen engines older than this one. The young Marine stood nearby, their earlier sharpness replaced with a mix of curiosity and unease, stealing glances at Mara as if she were a puzzle they couldn't solve. Colonel Nora Vance stood a few feet away, her posture relaxed, but her presence commanding. She hadn't spoken since ordering the mechanic, but her eyes kept returning to Mara, tracing the lines of a history they both knew too well. The Polaroid of Lila Brent sat on the dashboard, its corners curling like an old map. Lila's grin a silent witness to the moment. Mara caught herself staring at it, her fingers twitching as if reaching for a memory. "You're still with me, aren't you?" she whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. The mechanic, a grizzled man with salt and pepper hair and oil-stained forearms, called out from under the hood. "Fuel line's shot, but I've got a spare. Give me 20, and she'll purr like a kitten." He nodded toward Mara, a flicker of respect in his eyes, as if he sensed she was more than just a stranded traveler. Mara gave a small nod back. "Appreciate it." Her voice was steady, but her mind drifted, pulling her back to a place she hadn't visited in years. The desert heat of Al-Hadith, the acrid sting of smoke in her lungs, the crackle of static in her earpiece as Lila's voice cut through the chaos. "Keep moving, Mara. Don't stop. Not for me, not for anything." The memory hit like a fist, and Mara's hand tightened on the truck's frame. She'd kept moving, just like Lila had said, but every mile felt like a betrayal of the promise she'd made, to see the country, to find the freedom they'd fought for, to carry Lila's memory through every state. The corporal with the tablet shifted uncomfortably, his boots scuffing the gravel. "Ma'am," he said, glancing at Colonel Vance for approval, "if you don't mind me asking, that tattoo, is it really Shadow Squad?" Mara's gaze flicked to him, her hazel eyes unreadable. "It's just ink now," she said, but the weight of her words hung heavy. The younger Marine, the one with the nervous edge, opened his mouth to say something, then thought better of it. The third just stared, his jaw tight, as if he'd heard barrack stories about a unit that moved like ghosts and left no trace. Colonel Vance stepped forward, her boots silent on the gravel. "You don't have to answer them," she said, her voice low but kind. "But they should know who they're standing in front of." She turned to the Marines. "Shadow Squad didn't just fight. They walked into hell and pulled people out. This woman," she nodded toward Mara, "carried my lieutenant across a kill zone while under fire. She doesn't wear medals because she didn't stop to ask for them." Mara shifted, uncomfortable with the spotlight. "It wasn't just me," she said quietly. Lila was the one who held the line. She always did. The colonel's eyes softened, catching the name. "Lila Brent," she said, almost to herself. "I heard about her. The one who stayed behind at Al-Hadith?" Mara nodded, her throat tight. "She made me promise to keep going, to see what we were fighting for." She gestured toward the truck, its dented frame a testament to the miles she'd already covered. "That's why I'm here. Not to cause trouble. Just to keep a promise." The mechanic slammed the hood shut, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's good to go," he said, tossing Mara a faint grin. "Tougher than she looks, this one." "Always was," Mara replied, her lips twitching into the ghost of a smile. She glanced at the colonel. "Thanks for the assist." Vance shook her head. "It's the least we owe you." She hesitated, then added, "If you're willing, I'd like you to come onto the base, just for a bit. There are people who need to hear your story. Not for glory, just to understand." Mara's first instinct was to say no. She wasn't one for speeches or crowds, but she glanced at the Polaroid again, at Lila's fearless grin, and something shifted. "No ceremonies," she said finally. "Just people." "Done," Vance said, a spark of relief in her eyes. She turned to the Marines. "Escort her to the gate. Make sure she's treated with respect." The corporal nodded quickly, his earlier stiffness gone. "Yes, ma'am." As Mara climbed into the truck, the engine roared to life with a smoothness she hadn't heard in years. She tapped the Polaroid gently, her fingers lingering on Lila's face. "Guess we're not done yet," she murmured. The gate to Camp Pendleton loomed ahead, its steel bars glinting in the dusk. Beyond it, the base buzzed with life. Soldiers, drills, the faint clatter of equipment. But for Mara, it wasn't just a gate. It was a bridge to a past she'd carried in silence for too long. The truck rolled forward, the Marines falling into step beside her. The sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. And for the first time in years, Mara felt the weight of her promise lighten, if only by a fraction. The gates of Camp Pendleton parted under the last glow of twilight, their metal hinges creaking as Mara Kessler's pickup rolled through. The Virginia air had cooled, carrying the faint tang of jet fuel and mowed grass from the base's sprawling grounds. Mara's hands gripped the wheel, her knuckles smudged with grease, her hazel eyes scanning the orderly rows of barracks and training fields. The Polaroid of Lila Brent sat steady on the dashboard, its edges curling like a relic. Lila's grin a quiet anchor in the hum of the engine. Mara's tank top clung to her skin, the raven and dagger tattoo on her shoulder catching fleeting glints from the base's floodlights. Inside, the briefing room was sparse. Bare walls, rows of metal chairs, and a single ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. No banners, no pomp, just the low murmur of soldiers filing in, their boots scuffing the linoleum. Mara stood near the back, arms crossed, her braids slightly unraveled from the day's heat. The soldiers were young, most barely past their 20s, their uniforms crisp but their eyes heavy with curiosity. A few older sergeants leaned against the walls, their faces weathered, their postures rigid but attentive. Colonel Nora Vance stood at the front, her silver eagles gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She held no notes, no script, just the weight of memory. "We talk a lot about strategy in this room," Vance began, her voice steady, cutting through the hum of the fan. "Drills, missions, readiness. But today, you're here for something else." Her gaze shifted to Mara, who stood quietly by the door, her expression unreadable. "This woman is the reason some of us made it home. She served with Shadow Squad, a unit you won't find in any history book. Their missions were buried deeper than most of you will ever know." A ripple of whispers passed through the room. A young private leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Shadow Squad? I thought that was just a story from Basic." Another soldier, her hair pulled back tightly, stared at Mara's tattoo, her eyes wide with something like awe. Vance raised a hand, silencing the room. "Kalat Pass, 2008, she said, letting the name linger. "I was there, running recon in the hills. Shadow Squad went into that pass knowing the odds were against them. They didn't just gather intel or break enemy lines. They pulled 29 Marines out of a trap that should have been a slaughter." She paused, her eyes flicking to a sergeant by the wall, whose jaw tightened as he bowed his head. Mara stepped forward, her boots soft on the floor. She didn't take the podium, just stood beside it, her hand resting on its edge. The room went still, the air thick with expectation. "You want the story?" she asked, her voice low but clear, cutting through the silence. "Fine, but I'm not here for applause. I'm here so you understand what that patch meant." She tugged her tank top strap aside, revealing the raven and dagger inked into her skin. A few soldiers leaned closer, their breaths catching. "We were dropped into Kalat Pass at dusk," she began. 6 of us. No air support, no backup, just orders to get in and get out. The enemy had the high ground, snipers, IEDs, spotters with radios. We lost our point man in the first 30 minutes. Torres. Caught a round before we even hit the valley floor. Her voice was steady, but her fingers curled slightly at her side. Lila patched me up when a frag grazed my arm. She always carried extra med gear. Said the rule book was written by desk jockeys who never saw a firefight. A few soldiers chuckled, the sound soft, almost reverent. Mara didn't smile. By nightfall, we found the signal. A flare, but it wasn't ours. It was a trap. We heard the gunfire before we saw it, like a storm breaking open the dark. 30 rifles, maybe more, pinning down a Marine unit in the pass. She paused, her gaze distant, as if she could still hear the echo of bullets ricocheting off stone. A projector flickered on behind her, casting a grainy satellite image of Kalat Pass. Jagged cliffs, a narrow valley, dots marking trapped soldiers. Mara didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. They were cut off, bleeding out. A medevac chopper had crashed a mile out. No one else was coming. So we went in. Her words hung heavy, each one landing like a stone. The soldiers sat rigid, their eyes locked on her. "We weren't heroes," she said, her voice quieter now. "We just moved." Lila took point, laid down cover fire. I dragged a wounded Marine up a slope 50 yards through dirt and smoke. Lila was on comms, talking me through it, telling me to keep crawling, not to think. Mara's voice cracked, just for a moment. She steadied herself, her hand gripping the podium's edge. "We got them to the evac bird. 1 seat left. I carried the last man to the rope, told Lila to grab on. She wouldn't. Said I owed her a road trip, told me not to waste it." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she let it fall. The room was silent, not even a cough or a shuffle. She stayed behind, firing until the chopper was clear. I never saw her again. The projector clicked off. The silence deepened, heavy with the weight of a story no one had expected. A young corporal, his face still soft with youth, spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Ma'am, why isn't this in the records? Why don't we know about you?" Mara shrugged, her eyes on the floor. "Because it was classified. Because the world moved on. Because people like Lila didn't get medals. They got graves." Her words were soft but sharp, cutting through the room. Another soldier, her voice barely above a whisper, asked, "Why didn't you ever ask for recognition?" Mara looked up, her gaze steady. "We didn't do it for that. We did it for the person next to us. That's the only reason that matters." Colonel Vance stepped beside her, her presence grounding. "I heard her voice on the comms that night," she said quietly. "I didn't know her name then. I do now." She looked at Mara, then back at the soldiers. "This is what sacrifice looks like. Not in manuals, not in parades, but in moments like these. Remember it." The soldiers didn't clap. They didn't need to. As they filed out, some stopped to shake Mara's hand, their grips firm, their eyes searching. Others just nodded, carrying something new in their silence. Outside, the base glowed under a starlit sky, the air cool and sharp. Mara lingered by the door, the Polaroid's weight heavier than the coin Colonel Vance had pressed into her palm. A small silver disc etched with a crescent moon and the words, "For valor, for silence." "You've got a long road ahead," Vance said, her voice soft. "Where to next?" Mara glanced at the truck, at Lila's photo. Tennessee. Maybe Knoxville. Haven't decided yet. Vance nodded, then smiled faintly. Safe travels, Shadow Squad. Mara's lips curved, just slightly. Shadow Squad's gone, but Mara Kessler's still moving. She turned toward the gate, the engine's hum calling her back to the road, to the promise she'd keep for both of them